Okay, subject-verb agreement. This is actually a very straightforward topic, but because there's so many exceptions, a lot of students make mistakes with it. So I'm going to explain the basics and then some exceptions. So first thing is we need to understand what a subject and a verb is. So let me explain that, okay? For example, Maria works hard. This is a basic sentence. Maria works hard. So to find the subject of a sentence, we have to ask ourselves, who or what is this sentence about? Who or what is this sentence about? Oh, it's about Maria. So that's the subject. Now, what does the subject do? Or what is the subject doing? Or what has the subject done? What is the subject doing? We can ask, right? And the subject is Maria works. So the subject is Maria. What does Maria do? Maria works. That is the verb. Okay. Now, sentences have more than a subject and a verb, but we don't need to worry about that now because we're just talking about the subject and the verb and whether they agree or not. Okay. So the subject and this verb actually agree, and I will explain why they do agree. This is grammatical. Now, just so you remember, every sentence has to have at least one subject and at least one verb. Otherwise, it's not a sentence. And this is a complete sentence. It has at least one subject and one verb, and they agree. So it's grammatical. But some sentences can have more than one subject or more than one verb. And we need to make sure that we follow the subject-verb agreement rules. So in this sentence, the subject is one person. That means it's singular. And when the subject is singular, the verb has to agree with it. And I'll explain why later. So sometimes the subject can be plural. I can say Maria and John work hard. Maria and John work hard. Who or what is this sentence about? Maria and John. Okay, so now that's the subject. And you can see that it's not just one person, it's two. And then what are they doing? What do they do? What do Maria and John do? They work hard. So there's the verb. Notice on the verb in the second sentence, there's no S. But on the verb in the first sentence, there is an S. That's because we need to follow subject-verb agreement rules, which I'm going to explain right now. All right, so for a subject and a verb to agree with each other, we need to make sure we understand the ways in which they agree, okay? So I'm going to give you a list of subjects. I, you, he, she, it, they, we. Here's some subjects, okay? And we need to make sure that these subjects agree in the present tense because that's really the only time frame that we need to worry about subject-verb agreement in English. Not always, but for the most part. So the subject is here, okay? And we need to make it agree with the verb. I'm going to use the verb eat because I like to eat, okay? So I eat. You eat. He eats. She eats. It eats. They eat. We eat. Okay, so what do you see here? You see a pattern, right? We see over here with these three in the middle, that's the only time we use an S. And I like to say it's money. It's like money. It's important. Don't forget the money, right? Okay, so we're using third person singular over here, S. We call it third person singular. Third person singular S. What does third person singular mean? Okay, that's where we get to the rule of subject-verb agreement. Okay, so third person singular means that it's the third person. What does that mean? Okay, so first person is I or we. I'm the one who's talking. It's I or we. I is first person, and it's singular, okay? We is also first person, but it's plural. I like grammar. We enjoy math, okay? First person singular. Second person is the other person that you talk to directly, and when that person talks, that's second person. So we say you. You is second person, okay? And yeah, second person, and it can be singular or it can be plural, okay? So you, one person, you like grammar too. That's singular, but it can also be plural. You guys, or just you all, you love grammar, you, and you. You love grammar, okay? So it can be singular or it can be plural, all right? And now, third person singular. That's the important one in English because that's the only one where the verb really changes when we think about subject-verb agreement. So he, she, it, that's third person, not I, not you, not us having a conversation, but the person over there or the people over there, okay? So if it's one, he, she, it, John, the table, the paper, one that is not I, not you, but over there, then it's singular and it's third person. It could be that person over there or those people over there, and it's still third person like they, but it's actually plural, okay? But look, the only time the verb actually changes is with third person singular. So I always tell my students, don't forget third person singular S. Don't forget the money. You don't want to forget the money. You owe me $5 every time you forget that S on the third person singular. Okay, so that's the basics right now, okay? There is one type of verb that is very exceptional and has caused a lot of problems for people, but it's so common that you just memorize it. And that verb is your favorite verb, the verb be, okay? So I am, you are, he is, she is, it is, they are, we are. This is an exception because most verbs we only have to change third person singular, but with the verb be in the present tense, we're actually changing the first person singular and third person singular. So there's three forms. Okay, so you just have to remember that one, okay? All right, so let's talk about some more exceptions. Okay, so one exception in subject-verb agreement is with the verb be, okay? So you got to remember that the verb be in the present tense has three forms. If the subject is I, it's am. I am, you are, he, she, it is, they are, and we are. So this is one special exception you just need to remember. I am, you are, we are, they are, he is, she is, it is, the table is, the guitar is. Here is another exception. Okay, you know, if I say the mouse or a mouse, okay, a mouse lives in my room. Okay, for example, we see that this subject, a mouse, is singular. It's third person singular. And we see the verb has an S. That means subject-verb agreement is correct, okay? But what if I make this mouse many? What is the form of that? Well, that isn't mouses, it is mice. Now, we don't see an S on this noun when it's plural. It's an irregular plural, so it can be tricky. We forget sometimes that when there's not an S at the end of a noun or a subject, then that it's singular. But there are a lot of irregular plurals in English. Mice, feet, teeth, fish, right? There's a lot of irregular plurals, and so we have to watch out for those. Mice is plural, therefore we do not need to have an S on the verb. We say mice live, many mice live, okay? All right, and another exception that you might see with making subject-verb agreement is when we have something like this. A swarm of bees lives in my tree. True story. There really is a swarm of bees in my tree, and they almost got me one day. Okay, so a swarm of bees lives in my tree. Who or what is this sentence about? What is the subject? Bees, right? No, bees is not the subject. It's not. And a lot of people think it is. So what they do is they'll say, oh, a swarm of bees live. Because they think bees, oh, it's plural, live, no S. But no, that's not the subject. This is part of a prepositional phrase. So when you see a word like of, in, on, about, these prepositions, you can actually just cross it out and just look now, say, okay, a swarm, oh, that's who or what this sentence is about. A swarm is a group of bees. So a swarm, that's the subject, not bees. Live. A swarm live or a swarm lives? Well, this is third person singular. Remember, don't forget that $sign. When we have third person singular in the present tense, you need the S, okay? So a swarm of bees lives in my tree, okay? So be careful when there's an interruption coming from a prepositional phrase, okay? You always look for the subject, not the noun that comes after the preposition. Another tricky situation like this with an interruption is when we use an adjective clause to describe a noun before a verb in our sentence, okay? The bees that live in my tree do not bother me. Okay, so can you guys tell me what the subject is of this sentence? Who or what is this sentence about? Well, I'll tell you. The subject is bees. Who or what is the sentence about? The bees. Okay, that's the subject. Which bees? There's lots of different bees in the world. Which ones? Oh, the ones that live in my tree. This is actually just identifying which bees I'm talking about. Therefore, it's like an adjective. It acts like an adjective. Adjectives describe things. They describe nouns. So it's just a long adjective. We call it an adjective clause. It's describing the bees that I'm talking about. The bees that live in my tree do not bother me. Now, can you tell me what the subject is of this entire sentence? The bees is the subject. What do the bees do? The bees live? No, that's not the subject of this sentence. This part is a different clause. It's interrupting. The subject of this main sentence is do not bother. That's the verb, okay? So the bees do not bother me. This is the verb. So this subject and this verb have to agree. They're very far away from each other, but they have to agree. But also, you got to be careful when we have an adjective clause that is interrupting a sentence. A clause always also has a subject and verb of its own. So the subject is actually the word that, and the verb is the word live. But here, very important, the verb live does not agree with this. It actually has to agree with this part, this noun that the adjective clause is describing. So the bees that live, so this verb agrees with this. If I said the bees that lives, then it doesn't agree with that, okay? So be careful with prepositional phrases interrupting a subject and a verb, like the swarm of bees lives, and be careful with adjective clauses that interrupt the flow of a sentence. The bees that live in my house do not bother me. You have to make sure that the subject and verb agree in the main part of the sentence and also the extra clause if there's an adjective clause or another clause. With adjective clauses, it's especially important to make sure that the subject and the verb inside of the clause agrees with that subject. Let me give you one more example of an adjective clause subject-verb agreement. Okay, and I'm going to use singular this time. Okay. The flower that sits on my desk is yellow. Okay, I'm talking about bees, so I'm talking about flowers. The flower that sits on my desk is yellow. Who or what is the sentence about? The subject is the flower, okay? Now here you'll notice we have a really long adjective or an adjective clause that describes the flower. What kind of flower? The flower that sits on my desk. That's an adjective clause. It's a clause because it has a subject and verb of its own and it's describing a noun, flower. But this is not the verb in my sentence that this subject has to agree with. The verb that my sentence has to agree with is this one over here. Do they agree? The flower is yellow? Yes. Third person singular? Third person singular S on the verb, so it's good. But don't forget, inside the adjective clause, we also have a subject and a verb. So the subject is the word that sits, okay? They actually agree, but remember, this isn't the subject that the verb has to agree with. The verb in the adjective clause has to agree with the noun that the adjective clause is describing. The flower, one flower, sits on my desk. So it agrees. It has that third person singular S and it agrees, okay? So that's one type of exception. That is another type of exception. Let's talk about some more. All right, so this is something special with American English, and I don't know why we did this, but American English uses the singular form of a collective noun. A collective noun is just a noun, so person, place, or thing, that represents a collection or a group of things. For example, team, jury, audience, family. These are collections of people or things inside of one noun, okay? So, for example, in British English, I know they say family are because family is many people inside, so therefore it's plural. But in American English, we see it as singular and we call it a collective noun. So it's a collection, but it's one collection. So with subject-verb agreement, that becomes hard because if you see family as many people, you automatically think it's plural, which it is, but it also represents one family, so it's singular. And if you're living in the United States and you're writing for academic purposes, you might want to use this form or you're going to confuse people. I've actually talked to a lot of English professors, and I remember one time one of them said, "How do they not know that?" And I said, they probably came from a country where they studied British English, and that is actually correct. So, not everybody knows this, so be careful and know what it is. So I can say, the team trains often. the team. One team, but there's many people on the team. It's one team, that's the subject. And in American English, subject-verb agreement, the team is singular, third person singular. That means the verb has to have the S, third person singular S. Don't forget that dala dala, okay? Another example would be family. I think this is very common. My family loves, not love, to travel, okay? So family is a collective noun. It represents one group of people, therefore it's third person singular, and the verb that it agrees with has to have that S, okay? So be careful with collective nouns. All right, another fun and exciting exception with subject-verb agreement is indefinite pronouns. What in the world is that? Indefinite pronouns, they're pronouns. That means they replace a noun, okay? Like he replaces John, right? A pronoun replaces a noun. But it's indefinite, meaning it doesn't specifically refer to anybody in particular, okay? So some common indefinite pronouns in English are everyone, someone, anyone, no one. These words, recognize them? We can also say everybody, somebody, anybody, nobody, okay? They have the same meaning. But these words cause a problem because they're always singular. They are always third person singular. They are always third person singular. All of them. They are all third person singular, even though everyone means everyone, lots of people. Doesn't make sense. It's singular, what? Someone, okay, that makes sense. It's one person. Anyone, that could be many people. That could be one person. No one, that could be many of not anyone, right? So this is confusing, but remember, you always need to make sure that the subject and the verb agree when we're using these indefinite pronouns, and the rule is that you need third person singular S on the verb. So for example, I can say, no one knows this rule. Not really, people know this rule, but sometimes I see they don't. So no one's the subject. Verb has an S on it because no one is technically third person singular, okay? Here's another example. Oops. Does anyone know this rule? Does anyone know this rule? I'm using third person singular S in the question, in the verb. The subject is anyone. Remember, that's third person singular, which is why I gotta have that money dollar S sign there. And by the way, we use the word anyone with questions and negatives, usually, okay? All right, one more example. Everyone in this class speaks English. Everyone in this class. So what's the subject? The subject's everyone. Remember, that's third person singular. Even though it represents every single person in this class, it's singular. So it has to agree with the verb in a singular form. Everyone in this class speaks. Here's the S. Make sure it has a third person singular S. And also remember, in this class is a prepositional phrase. Class is not the subject of the sentence. Everyone is. How do we know that? We have a preposition in. The noun that comes after that, just take it out. Now we can clearly see the subject. Everyone speaks English. Subject, verb, agreement. Okay, so that's one exception. Another exception of subject-verb agreement. Okay, so just like when we use everyone, someone, anyone, no one, we also need to be careful with words like every and each. When we use these words, we also have to remember that the verb is always going to agree in a singular way. So for example, every person. So you think when I say every person, I mean this person, this person, this person, this person, all these people. But no, I mean all those people, but it's singular. So every person is here. Every person is here. Everyone is here, okay? So the verb has to agree with this subject, okay, which is singular, and that's because of the word every. Every makes it singular, okay? So each class makes me work hard. I have 5 classes maybe, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each of them, which sounds like plural, right? But no, because I'm using the word each, it's actually singular, okay? That's an exception. So each class, S, third person singular S, makes me work hard. Each class makes me work hard. So be careful with every and be careful with each. It's always third person singular. All right, now this is an area where I see even native speakers making mistakes. Okay, so when we want to use expressions with the word of that show quantity, like this, all of, some of, a lot of, okay? These are some examples, okay? Even percentages, right? So I can say 20% of. When I use these expressions of quantity, like how much, and then I use the word of, I'm always going to use a noun after it. That noun can be singular or it can be plural. And depending on whether it's singular or plural, the verb will have to agree appropriately. So if I say all of, and I use a singular noun, so I can say, for example, all of my water in my water bottle. All of my water is, or all of my water are. What is it? It should be is. That's because water is singular. It's singular and it's third person singular, okay? All of my water is gone. I need to get more, okay? Some of my water is gone, I can say, but let's use a plural noun, okay? So for example, I can say some of the books. What am I gonna say? Some of the books is, or some of the books are, some of the books have, or some of the books has. Which one is it? Well, this is plural, it's more than one. So the verb should be plural. Some of the books are interesting, some of the books are not interesting. A lot of, okay, let's try it with singular and plural. A lot of milk. A lot of milk. And when I use a singular noun, it's usually a non-count noun, okay? A lot of milk, a lot of water, a lot of air, a lot of furniture, right? These are non-count nouns because we can't really use a singular count noun. I can't say a lot of tree or a lot of person, right? It has to be a non-count noun if I'm going to use these. So a lot of air, a lot of love, right? These non-count nouns. So a lot of milk hurts your body, maybe, okay? I put the S, third person singular, because milk is singular, third person singular. But if I say a lot of birds, that's plural. A lot of birds sing outside. A lot of birds sing outside. No S on this verb because the subject is plural, so I don't need an S. How about here, 20% of? 20% of the class. Is that singular or plural? 20% of the class. Is it 20% of the class is or 20% of the class are? It should be is because class is 1. 20% of the class is not going to pass or is going to pass, okay? But if I say 20% of the students in this class, now it's plural. 20% of the students are going to pass. 20% of the students are not going to pass. Okay, so just be careful with these expressions of quantity. But remember, when we say each, we always need to make it singular. Each of the students is. Each of my friends is. And when we use every one of my friends is. Every, right? Each, every, and of course one of. When I say one of, it always means one. One of my books is. One of my friends is, okay? So be careful with each, every, and one. When we use them with of, they're always singular, okay? This is a special exception. One of my friends is. One of my books is. Each of my friends is. Each of my books is, okay? Now, sometimes we will use expressions of quantity to say how much of something without the word of, okay? So sometimes we'll just say, hey, $20, I found $20. Wow, that's a lot of money. $20 is or $20 are? Technically, it's is, okay? So $20, it's plural. It's plural, but this is an expression of quantity. It represents one amount of something. So I need to use the singular form, okay? $20 is, okay? How about this one? If I say 2 months, that's how long I have to wait before I can see my friend again. 2 months, gosh, that is a long time or that are a long time? Well, this is an expression of quantity, of amount of time, how much. And so the verb has to be singular because it just represents one time frame, okay? Maybe I want to say 5 guesses. I guessed 5 times. I lost the game. 5 guesses make you lose the game, right? Is it make? Or is it makes? 5 guesses make you lose or 5 guesses makes you lose? Well, according to this rule, this represents a quantity, an expression of time, of how much, and it's 1. So it's not make, it's makes, because it needs to agree with this in a singular way, okay? So this is really tricky. Just remember, if you have of after something, like 5 days of the week, right? Then of, you need to look at the noun coming after. But if you don't have the word of and you have an expression of quantity or time or how much of something, then that represents 1. And so the verb needs to be singular. All right, another exception, and not really an exception, it's kind of just something, a reminder. A gerund can be a noun. A gerund can be the subject of a sentence also, right? Remember, a gerund represents an activity. A gerund is a verb plus the ing, so walking, talking, eating, swimming. These can be subjects of sentences, and when they represent an activity. Therefore, it's 1. It's third person singular, okay? So I can say running makes me happy. This is true. Subject, who or what is the sentence about? Running. That's the activity, that's the subject of the sentence. Does it agree with the verb? If the subject is running, that means it's third person and it's singular, it's one activity. That means the verb needs to have an S on it, and it does. Third person singular agrees, it's good. okay? But what if I said running and swimming? What would I need to do here? I would have to say make me happy. Running and swimming make me happy. That's because now I have a plural subject. It's two activities. It's more than one. Running and swimming. So over here on the verb, no S, okay? Just remember, gerunds are singular. They are third person singular. So the verb has to have an S if you're using the present tense. Okay, another exception, another fun and exciting exception with subject-verb agreement is when we use words like there and here, okay? So, there and here. When we use these words, we're talking about the existence of something, that something exists, okay? So I can say, there are chickens outside. Here are many students watching a video, okay? So when we write a sentence like this, the subject and the verb actually switch places, okay? There are chickens outside. I don't know if you can hear them, but they're out there. There are chickens outside. The subject of the sentence, who or what this sentence is about, who or what is the sentence about? There are chickens outside. It's about the chickens. That's the subject. But look, it's coming after the verb. Why is that? That's just the rule. When we start a sentence with here or there, we put the verb and then the subject. The word here or there is not the subject. So don't try to make the verb agree with the word there. It doesn't work. You have to make the verb agree with the subject, which is plural here. So we need to say are. How about if I say, if I want to use the word here? Here, oops, here are my books. Here are my books, okay? So where's the subject? Is it here? No, the subject is not here. The subject comes after the verb. The subject is my books. Singular or plural? It's plural. So the subject needs to be, the verb also needs to be plural. Now this is an exception that you will hear Americans and native, probably a lot of native speakers of English making when they're talking. So when you're writing, you need to make sure you have subject-verb agreement like this, okay? But when you're talking, sometimes you will have a plural and a plural. But when we're talking, we don't say the plural. We actually will say something like, here's my books. Here's my books. We don't say, here are my books. We say, here's my books, because we're talking so fast that we'll just say it like this. Okay, now technically this is not grammatical, but sometimes we don't need to be grammatical all the time. We just need to get our idea across. And anyway, this is something that's changing in English. It's an exception to the rule, and it's appropriate to break this rule, okay? In my opinion, and probably in the opinion of any linguist out there, okay? So this is technically not grammatical. It's singular. The subject is plural, but when we're talking, it's okay to do that. We do it all the time. Same thing up here. The chickens outside, okay? There's chickens outside. We'll say there's chickens outside, but there's many chickens. It should be there are. No, it's okay when you're talking, there's chickens outside, okay? Don't do it in academic writing. Just don't do it in academic writing. In academic writing, subject and verb always have to agree. And every once in a while, we will have a sentence where everything is written nicely, but then we add an interrupter. And when we add an interrupter, we actually have to be careful if it comes between the subject and verb, because that interrupter might make us think that something that is not the subject is the subject. So for example, in this sentence, grammar is difficult. So in this sentence, you can see, obviously, the subject is grammar and the verb is, and they agree nicely. But if I want to explain the word grammar or add some information about that with an interrupter, I'm going to put it here. So I might say grammar, especially articles. Now I have an interrupter, and in order to make sure that I maintain the correct subject-verb agreement, I have to know this information is just extra. So my subject is grammar, and this is just giving more information about it. So grammar, especially articles, is difficult. Another type of common interrupter is to use something like together or along with. So I can say grammar together with vocabulary is difficult. So when I do this, together with is still an interrupter. It is not part of the subject. The subject is grammar, okay? So this is just extra information. It's not part of the subject, so the verb is still singular, okay? Or maybe I will say, instead of together, I might say along with, same thing, okay? We also will use something called an appositive to work as an interrupter, and it looks like this. So I can say, English courses are offered all over the world. Okay, so this is my subject, English courses. Here's my verb, right? It agrees, plural, plural. I can add an appositive here, and that's just a name of, it's renaming this noun. So an appositive for English courses could be English courses offered all of courses in English. Some way to rename this English courses, right? So English courses, classes offered in English, something like this, right? Or classes teaching the English language. This is an example of an appositive, or it could even be a reduced adjective clause in some cases. English courses, classes teaching the English language, are offered all over the world. This is an interrupter, okay? So we have to make sure we know that, and we can put commas around it to show the reader that we know that, but we still need to make sure this is the subject that needs to agree with this verb, not the information in this section, okay? That's a little bit of an area where a lot of students might get confused. All right, now one last lovely, great exception that makes this language so difficult is when we do have something that ends with an S, and it is plural, it's actually singular sometimes. For example, the United States. The name, the United States, actually represents one country, so it's singular, but it's plural, states, the United States, right? So you would think, well, it's plural, it's many states, but no, it represents one country. So you need to be careful there. I'm just gonna say the US is. The US is a big country. The US is, right? The US has a lot of land, okay? It's not are, it's not have, because the US, even though there's an S at the end, United States, it's one country, okay? Same things with, a group of might have a group of islands or something. So I might say the Canary Islands. Okay, that represents one group of islands. The Canary Islands is one place. So am I going to say the Canary Islands have a lot of fun outdoor activities, or the Canary Islands has? Is it have or has? Well, technically it should be has. The Canary Islands has a great deal of outdoor activities. Okay, and that is because even though it has an S at the end and it looks plural, which it is, it's many islands, it represents one group of islands and it's one place, okay? Just like the Philippines, right? The British Islands. So these are examples of nouns that are plural, but they represent one, okay? Now then we can go backwards and we can find examples of something that looks singular, but that is actually plural. So we do this with nationalities sometimes. Only nationalities that end with a ESE, a CH, or a SH. So when I say the Chinese, the Japanese, right? Or the French, the Dutch, SH, the Spanish, right? So these are, I always put the in front of them, okay? And I could say the Japanese, the Dutch, the Spanish. I can't do it with any other type of nationality if it doesn't end with this. I can't say the American. I can't do it like that, okay? But what I'm doing is I'm saying the Japanese, the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, and it looks singular, but it's plural because it represents all the people of that nationality, okay? So this is actually plural. It looks singular, but it's plural because it represents everybody within that nationality. So I would say the Japanese love something, not the Japanese loves. It's the Japanese love nature and outside activities, right? Or the Dutch are or the Dutch is. It's the Dutch are because this is plural. It represents all of the people within that nationality. The Spanish, okay? And I'm going to say the Spanish likes or like. Well, if it's plural, it should be plural. It represents all the people of that nationality. The Spanish like to go and socialize outside. Okay, so this is another really beautiful, amazing exception that you just gotta kind of remember. But really reading and talking to people is the best way to learn this, okay? All right, now one more exception just like this is another one where we use the word the in front of it, okay? But we use the plus some sort of adjective. An adjective is a word that describes a noun. But we're not using it as an adjective. We're actually using it as a noun. So I can say, the educated. That's it. Educated is an adjective, but I'm using it as a noun. Or I can say something like the 1%. You've probably heard of this. Or I can say the 1%, okay? The elite, the rich, the poor. These types of adjectives we can use as nouns actually. And when we do use them as nouns, we're using them as a plural noun because we're talking about all the people that identify with that adjective. So the educated are open to different things. Okay, the 1% have, not has, the 1% have really nice things, right? The elite, same thing, plural. The elite live in very expensive homes. The poor need support, right? So these, again, they look singular. They don't even look like nouns. They're actually adjectives, but we're using them as nouns. and we're using them as plural nouns, so the verb has to agree with it as if it's a plural noun, okay? And those are our fun, exciting exceptions. Now, subject-verb agreement is very hard because of these exceptions, but with practice, with reading, with speaking, with talking to people, with listening to people, you're going to eventually get it, okay? Good luck. Okay, so we've gone over all these rules and exceptions with subject-verb agreement, and we've seen a few examples, but let's look at a few more and try to identify the types of rules or exceptions that they are, and also try to see if we can figure out which verb form we need to use. All right, so let's share my screen, and here we have a list, and we need to fill out the rule or exception, and we also need to fill out which verb form works here. We're going to use the present tense for all of these, okay? So I'm just going to go through. My books blank on the desk, okay? So the subject I'm going to identify and I'm going to put in yellow. My books on the desk. So my books is plural, so I'm going to say are on the desk. Here, my book, that's the subject, but it's singular. So instead of are, I'm just going to say is. My books are on the desk and my book is on the desk. So the verb I'm going to put in green for all these examples, okay, just to make sure that we can see them. And over here, the type of rule or exception is this is just basic subject-verb agreement, okay, rule that singular subjects, you need a singular verb. Plural subjects, you need a plural. That's the rule. Okay, it's actually the other way around. That one at the top and that one there. Okay, so I'm referring back to these examples right here. All right, now the next one says, my brother and sister blank to talk a lot. My brother and sister, well, that's plural. So I'm gonna say like to talk a lot. My brother, that's one, it's singular. So I'm going to say likes to talk a lot. I need to make sure that up here, since I have a plural subject, that I use a plural verb. And over here, since I have a singular subject, my brother, that I have a singular verb with an S. So same rule as above. When you have a plural subject, you need a plural verb, and when you have a singular subject, you have a singular verb. All right, down here, the apples in my kitchen, blank tasty. All right, now be careful here because look, what's the subject of this sentence? Is it kitchen or is it apples? Who or what is the sentence about? Well, you know, remember that when we see a preposition like the word in, that the noun after it would not be the subject of a sentence. So we can just cross that right out. And now we can see the apples is the subject. Okay, so the apples are tasty or the apples is tasty? Well, the apples is plural, so it should be are. Okay, the apples is the subject and the verb is are and it's plural. Over here, the pear in my bag. Okay, so what's the subject? Is it the pear or is it my bag? Well, we see a preposition, the word in. So let's take that whole phrase out and focus on the pear. The pear is the subject, and is it singular or plural? Well, it is singular. So the pear is or the pear are tasty? Pear is tasty because it's singular subject, so it needs a singular verb. So over here, the exception is just be careful of prepositional phrases. Don't let the prepositional phrase make you think that the object inside of it is the subject. No, 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 no. The subject is what comes before that prepositional phrase, and that subject has to agree with the verb. All right, next part, the dogs that blank on my street blank a lot. Okay, so I'm just gonna say they live there, they bark a lot. So the dogs, here is the subject of a sentence, the dogs, okay, and it's plural. But here we have the word that. So that means right here we're gonna have an adjective clause where I'm gonna describe the dogs. The dogs that, is it live or lives on my street? Well, the answer is live. Why? Because the dogs is plural. So the verb of this adjective clause actually has to be plural as well, because the verb inside the adjective clause has to agree with the noun it's describing. So we're making that plural. The dogs that live on my street, do they bark a lot or do they barks a lot? Well, the dogs is the subject, so that means it's plural. We need to have a plural verb, bark a lot, okay? So again, oops, this should be green. So again, I should remind you that here's the subject of the sentence, the dogs bark a lot, that's the verb. Over here, what we have is an adjective clause, okay? So this is just interrupting the flow of the sentence or adding more detail, but because it's a clause, it actually has a subject and a verb itself. And the subject is technically the word that, but remember, the word that and live don't agree. What the verb live has to agree with is the noun that the adjective clause is describing, which in this case is the dogs, okay? Over here, the dog that blank on my street, blank a lot. Okay, now it's one dog. So the dog that lives on my street barks a lot. Same thing. The subject is the dog. It's singular. The verb is barks, so it has to have an S. Now over here we have an adjective clause. It has its own subject, the word that, and its own verb. But the verb doesn't have to agree with the word that. The verb has to agree with the dog, okay? So the exception here is adjective clause verbs have to agree with the noun the adjective clause is describing, okay? There's so many more examples we can use with adjective clauses. If you want to learn more about adjective clauses, you can watch the adjective clause video. All right, the next one is her feet blank blisters. So is it her feet have or her feet has? Well, it should be her feet have blisters. And that is because the subject is plural. Even though it doesn't look plural, it is. It's an irregular plural. So the verb, of course, also needs to be plural. And I'm going to make the verb green. How about over here? Her foot, there's the subject. Her foot, is it have or has blisters? Well, it's one foot. So in this case, we should say has, because we need third person singular S. Her feet have blisters. Her foot has a blister. So the exception that we need to watch out for over here is for irregular plurals. We need to be careful, okay? All right, the next one over here is someone blank the answer. Someone know the answer or someone knows the answer. It's someone knows the answer. The subject is someone and the verb is knows. But how did we know we needed an S there? That's because this is one of those indefinite pronouns. Someone, anyone, everyone, no one. Same thing with everyone. It represents many, but it's singular. Everyone want or everyone wants to go to the beach today. It should be wants because everyone is a singular subject. It is third person singular and the verb has to have an S on it. Next one, we're using anyone as the subject. Okay, so look at the verb over here. It's in the past participle. That means we're going to use passive or present perfect or past perfect. So has or have. Has. It should be has. Has is the verb. Anyone is the subject. Anyone is one of those indefinite pronouns. That means it's always third person singular, which means the verb always has to have an S. So the exception here is indefinite pronouns. Watch out for those. We need to make sure that indefinite pronouns are always singular. Be careful because they are always third person singular. Okay? All right. The next example I have is the audience blank the movie. Okay, so the audience likes the movie or the audience like the movie. Now remember, in American English, the audience, even though it represents a group, is actually singular. So the audience is the subject. It's one audience, even though it's a group of people. Therefore, the verb has to have a third person singular S because the subject is third person singular. Same thing here, the jury. The jury has to make a decision, or the jury have to make a decision. It should be has to make a decision. That is because the subject is third person singular. Even though it represents a group of people, it's a collective noun. It's third person singular in American English, and the verb has to have an S. So the exception here is be careful. Well, it's the exception is that these are collective nouns. They are always third person singular in American English. Okay, all right, next rule. Some of the fruit has gone bad, or some of the fruit have gone bad. What are we going to do here? Okay, well, what we need to do is when we have an expression of quantity like this with of, some of, 20% of, one of, right? What we need to do is we look at the noun that comes after of. Is it singular or plural? In this case, it's singular. So I'm going to focus on this, even though it's not the subject. It's not the subject. The subject is some, okay? But we need to make sure that when we use a quantity like some of, 20% of, a lot of, all of, right? That we make the noun that comes after of, even though it's not the subject, we make it agree with the verb. So some of the fruit has gone bad. It's gonna be a singular verb with an S because fruit is one, it's singular, okay? Over here, some of, we have again, some is technically the subject here because of is a preposition. So the noun that comes after is not the subject. But in this case, we're talking about a quantity. So the apples, some of the apples, apples is plural. So even though this is not the subject, okay, we need to make sure that the verb agrees with this plural noun. So I'm going to say some of the apples have gone bad, or some of the apples has gone bad. It's going to be have. Some of the apples have gone bad, and that is because this is plural. 20% of, okay, here I have another quantity, an expression of quantity here with of. So look, is this singular, my grades, or is this plural? It's plural. It's not the subject. The subject is 20%. But when we have of like this, showing a quantity, we look at the noun after of, and it's plural. So the verb has to be plural. 20% of my grades are high. 20% of my grade, that's singular, okay? It's coming after of, an expression of quantity, so I need to make the verb agree with that singular noun. 20% of my grade is high, okay? So I'm gonna use the singular form. Okay, and then remember there were even some exceptions within this exception. Whenever we say one of, we always mean one, but it's from a group. Okay, so this, the students, is plural. Okay, it's coming after of a quantity, but you do not make the verb agree with the students. It has to agree with this one, this number one. Okay, so just one of all the students has or have the answer. Should be has. You do not make this verb agree with the students, even though we did that in the other samples. This is because one of, none of, each of, these are exceptions, okay? Actually, these are the rule, okay? And then over here, we have none of the students. So none is, remember, it's one of those indefinite words. It represents always a singular form. It's always representing one. Even if right here we have plural, we have a plural noun, it's always going to be singular. So none of the students knows the answer, or none of the students know the answer. The answer should be knows. It has to be third person singular because this is always third person singular, none. This has to be third person singular because one is always third person singular. But over here with these ones, some of, all of, 20% of, these quantities, a lot of, all of. Remember, we have to make sure that we aren't looking at the some, the all of, the a lot of. We're actually looking at the noun that comes after of, okay? So the exception is with expressions of quantity, with the word of, we have to look, require, expressions of quantity with of require that we look at the noun after of, okay? If it's singular, the verb is singular. If it's plural, the verb is plural. But if the expression of quantity with of is none or one or each, then the verb is always singular, okay? All right, that's a tricky one. All right, the next example we have is practicing English, blank people learn the rules. Okay, so what's the subject here? Remember, an activity, which is this, practicing English, can be the subject of a sentence. This is called a gerund. And when the gerund is a subject and it's just one gerund, it's one activity, then the verb is singular. So practicing English helps people learn, or practicing English help people learn? Should be helps. Therefore, we know that with a gerund, it's singular. The verb is singular. Practicing English and studying the rules help people learn or helps people learn? In this case, it's help people learn. That's because this is a plural subject. It's two gerunds, it's two activities. So because it's plural, the verb has to be plural. Help, no S. So this rule is gerunds are third person singular subjects. So they take a singular verb. But of course, when there are two gerunds, two or more, right? Two or more gerunds, the verb is plural. Okay? All right. Next, there blank a stain on his shirt. Okay. Remember when we start a sentence with there or here, we have to do something weird, something special, okay? So where's the subject? When we start a sentence with there, the subject is not there. The subject is actually after the verb. So we're gonna look at the word stain. The stain, a stain, it's one stain. So am I gonna say there is a stain or there are a stain? It's gonna be is. That's subject-verb agreement. We have a singular verb with a singular subject. There, blank stains. So stains is the subject, it's plural this time, so the verb has to be plural. There are stains on his shirt. Plural verb, plural subject. So the exception is when a sentence starts with there or here, the verb comes before the subject, okay? So we need to be careful with the subject-verb agreement. The subject is not here. The subject is not there, okay? All right, next we have two meetings, blank, not enough to discuss the problem. Two meetings, blank, not enough to discuss the problem. Okay, now this is a quantity of time. It's showing how much of something, and we're not using the word of after it. So here, it's actually representing one thing, one quantity of time. So am I going to say two meetings is not enough to discuss the problem, or two meetings are not enough? Technically, it should be is. Two meetings is not enough. Talking about this being an expression, a quantity of time, an expression of time, a quantity of time, okay, that represents one thing that I'm discussing. Two meetings, that is not enough. Two meetings is not enough. So the subject is two meetings, and the verb is. 5 years. I know, 5 years, that's plural. I know that, but this is representing an amount of time. It's a quantity. So it's technically singular, okay? So that means the verb needs to be singular. 5 years is not a long time to wait. Okay? So the exception is for expressions, expressions of time, quantity that represent one thing are third person singular. So the verb has to be third person singular. All right, last one. Whew, this is a lot. Okay, good for you for sticking through all the way if you are still watching. All right, and you should be if this is, you know, your class, right? All right, the Philippines blank a lot of natural resources. The Philippines blank a lot of natural resources. Now we're talking about one country, but it's plural. It has an S at the end. Doesn't matter. It's still one country. The subject is singular, even though it has an S. So the verb has to be singular. So am I going to say the Philippines has a lot of natural resources, or the Philippines have? It's going to be has. The Philippines has, third person singular S. All right, the United States, that's the subject. It's also plural, but it represents one country. It's many states, but it represents one country. So the verb has to have what? Consists of or consist of. The United States consists of 50 states. The verb has to be singular with an S. The French, remember we talked about we can describe a group of people that have the same nationality when that nationality ends with CH, SH, or ESE. Well, we can say the French, right? The Vietnamese, we can put them all into one group and it represents many, right? So the French have or the French has should be have, because here I'm saying that the French are all one, it's many people. It's all these different people, all of one nationality. So the verb is plural. The Vietnamese, yeah, it's one word. It doesn't look plural, but it is plural because I'm talking about all the Vietnamese people. So the Vietnamese live or lives all over the world. Should be live all over the world. Plural verb, plural subject. Same thing with when we want to describe people that are all many people that are of the same group when we're using adjectives to describe them. So we can turn an adjective into a noun like this. So the poor. It's not plural, but it is plural because it represents a lot of people. So all the poor. The poor need or the poor needs support. Need support. It's a plural verb because the subject is plural because it's many people, all the poor. The rich, same thing, all the rich, all of those people. The rich have a lot of resources. We need a plural verb because the subject is plural. So here, the exception is that that even if a noun, even if a subject doesn't have a plural singular form, if it represents something plural, the verb is plural. If it represents something singular, the verb is singular. Okay? And that is only when we're talking about nationalities and when we're talking about adjectives that describe a group of people. Okay? There you are. I hope this has helped you to see those rules and exceptions in real life examples. Of course, these real life examples come from talking to people, from listening to things, and from reading. All right, so good luck and keep on keeping on.